In Syria, the government and Kurdish-led forces have agreed to extend a ceasefire that was due to expire Saturday as talks over the future of Kurdish-controlled areas continue. According to the news agency AFP, officials in Damascus say the extension could last up to a month. One key reason, they say, is the need to complete the transfer of detainees from the so-called Islamic State from Syria to Iraq. The fate of those detainees and the camps holding their families has become a central issue in the negotiations.
This displacement camp is one of the most complex humanitarian challenges remaining in post-war Syria. For years, Al-Hol camp has housed tens of thousands of people linked to the so-called Islamic State. What began as a displacement site has since become, in effect, an open-air detention camp, mostly for women and children of IS fighters.
My husband, first he was with al-Nusra, then Islamic State, and then he was killed in Manbij.
Nawal says she has lived at this camp for 7 years, in terrible conditions. She's Moroccan, and like many foreign women here, she remains stuck in legal limbo. That's because many countries have refused to repatriate their citizens, saying they should be tried in Syria for crimes committed by IS.
We thought we'd leave and go back to our countries, but we're still detained.
Although the Islamic State's self-declared caliphate collapsed in 2019, remnants of the group remain, and its ideology has lived on inside the camp, largely unchallenged, posing a major security challenge for Syria's new government, whose forces are currently securing the perimeters of the camp. Aid groups warn that an entire generation of children has grown up here, deprived of formal education, living in dire conditions, and vulnerable to radicalization. While the UN says it is stepping in to help, the fate of thousands here is still unclear.
Well, with the humanitarian situation dire, let's talk about the truce. Christian Brackel is from the German Council on Foreign Relations and heads the Beirut office of the Heinrich Böll Foundation. Is this extension of the truce about the transfer of IS detainees, or do both sides need time to work out the details of their deal?
I think it's probably both. I mean, the detainee issue and what has unfolded over the last days in the prison camps is definitely an issue of concern, especially to the Americans, but also to some regional powers like Iraq. But to be fair, also the original timeline of just 4 days, given how complex the issues that need to be negotiated are and how many external actors are involved, was probably unrealistic to start with.
OK, well, let's talk about external actors. If Washington is pushing for more time, what is the US actually trying to achieve with this extension? And do they have the leverage to do so?
They definitely have the leverage. I mean, the US is still a very important actor, both for the central government in Damascus, and it's like the one main ally that the SDF, at least till today, has left. And of course, it also has leverage with some of the important countries like Turkey that are looking, with quite some suspicion what might happen with the SDF in the future. And what the Americans exactly want, I mean, we can only guess, but I mean, there has been some internal pushback from the Pentagon and also within the Congress to this route that the Americans had taken originally last week, just more or less abandoning the SDF. And people are saying now, okay, at least if we're going to withdraw, then we need like a better deal for our Kurdish partners.
Mm-hmm. So where does this extra time leave Syria's Kurds?
It still leaves them in a very vulnerable position. It's not. I think we have to distinguish between two things. One is like the Kurdish population in Syria. Not all of them feel represented by the SDF. Not all of them feel represented by this particular political stream that has connections with the PKK. And then to distinguish between the SDF as a political force. So for the SDF as a political force, I think things hang very much by a thread. It's very unclear if some kind of like autonomy or at least like government power sharing will be something that the SDF can benefit from in the medium term, maybe in the long term. And the other thing is, of course, like protecting the rights, cultural rights, but also political rights of Kurds, the Kurdish community as such. I think there we have seen more positive signals over the last week.
What sort of signals are you seeing? Because could this all lead to genuine political inclusion of the Kurds rather than just central control over their territory?
I think there is an offer on the table that we know of, no? Even on January 18th, made by President Shara, to say that there will be some cultural rights be granted to the Kurdish community when it comes to, for example, the use of Kurmanji as a language, but also, for example, there have been talks that some senior government positions would be staffed by people from the ranks of the SDF.
But you do consider that as genuine?
I think that's genuine. The question is how the whole, like how Syria will look in the future. Will it be a centralized state ruled by one strong man, or will there be generally the idea of more liberal rights for all of Syria's communities, even those who don't necessarily agree with the political vision of Damascus?
Christian Braco, thank you very much for your analysis.
All right, let's cross over to DW's Beirut Bureau Chief Mohammed Schrater, who gathered this exclusive material from Al-Hol camp. Hello, Mohammed. So why does it matter what happens at the camp, not just for the people held there, but for Syria and the wider region?
Because these camps are both a huge humanitarian crisis and a security time bomb. You see, the poor conditions in these detention centers and the absence of any legal processes for years fuel radicalization there. Let's take the Hol as an example, the Al-Hol camp as an example. It is considered to be one of the largest open-air detentions in the world, where nearly 60% of the inmates are children who have been deprived from education and have spent at least 10 years there. So one can only assume the ideas that they grew up with, excluded from the entire outside world. So any collapse in control risks mass escapes that could revive ISIS networks across Syria, Iraq, and the whole region.
So who is realistically able and willing even to secure this camp and prevent further radicalization? Is that the UN?
Well, in practice, only states with sustained and powerful resources can do it, dealing with tens of thousands of detainees, some of whom are extremists and really dangerous and radicals. This requires sophisticated materials and equipment and systems that at least the Syrian state or even Iraq do not possess at the moment. That's why the US and UN are stepping currently and taking the lead. The US is transferring thousands of these detainees, mainly ISIS members, to Iraq and putting pressure on the foreign governments to repatriate foreign fighters and start the prosecution process to ease the situation.
Right. You say Syria may not be able to handle the camp, but before taking office, Syrian President Ahmad al-Sharaa led a rebel group affiliated with Al-Qaeda. I'm just wondering how that background could influence how IS detainees are treated, especially women and children.
Well, the fact is that Ahmad al-Shara was on so many levels the Islamic State group's number one enemy. The rivalry between both parties goes back to 2014 when al-Shara himself refused to swear allegiance to ISIS, and therefore the group, his group Al-Nusra Front, fought ISIS fiercely in many occasions and across many areas in Syria. But ever since al-Shara became president, he showed pragmatic side, and that appears to be largely convincing to regional and international powers who have been offering him support and cooperation so far.
Right. Here's what I also find interesting. You know, many of those held at the camp are foreign nationals, yet their home countries have largely refused to repatriate them. Is there any sign that international pressure on those governments could now increase?
Yeah, well, as you said, many of these detainees are foreign fighters whose home state have been refusing or avoiding repatriation. Now that the camp, the control of the camp has shifted to Damascus and the detainees are being moved to Iraq by the US, I think that legal and human rights pressure will intensify, and potentially increasing pressure, especially by the United States, may force foreign governments to repatriate and at least support the detention and prosecutions rather than just leave the problem as it is locally.
Right. Mohammed Shraita, thank you.